As I'm sure most of you have heard by now, Daunte Wright, a 20-year-old black man, was shot and killed by police during a traffic stop. I'm not sure if you guys seen the video. After watching the video, I would be lying if I came out and said that the officer 100% intended to shoot and kill Daunte Wright. But regardless, I think that's kind of irrelevant to the discussion. She was wrong, period. There were many different ways that she was wrong. The most obvious, most glaring is, she was saying that she meant to grab her taser and shoot him with the taser. Instead, she accidentally grabbed her gun and shot him. And in the video, she's before she shoots, she shouts, because there's another officer that was kind of wrestling with him in the car. She shouts, "I'm going to tase him," or something like that, or yeah, I'm going to tase him. I'm going to tase him, or something like that, while she's holding the gun. And then she shoots the gun, and that's when she says, "Oh my God, I shot him. I shot him." So I'm not going to like I said, I'm not going to get into whether she intended to kill him or not. You are supposed to be a trained police officer. You should never be in a situation where you can accidentally grab a gun instead of a taser. And if you do find yourself in that situation, you are wrong by default. So, like I said, whether she intended to kill him or not is a separate thing to debate, but something else that's worth discussing, which is a common theme here, is the indifference or the callousness to human life that we see from these police officers. You get a lot of cases of stone cold murderers, but then you also get cases of people who are just like I said, they're so callous, they're so reckless that they aren't taking the necessary precautions to make sure that they're protecting this same person. Because even if you're in an altercation with the police, even if they're arresting you, you're still a citizen, and part of their job is keeping you safe and taking you into custody. It's not, the second they try to arrest you, you become like some enemy, and they're well within their rights to kill you. No, that's not what the situation is at all. So there is this lack of restraint and over aggressiveness from the police that are leading to the deaths of a lot of people, a lot of innocent, unarmed black people in this country. And that is a whole separate discussion from the people who are just stone cold murderers like Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd. But either way, there are systemic problems that need to be fixed here, because this situation is untenable, where just regular people going about their regular day, if they have some type of altercation with the police officer, they're liable to be killed. And then on top of that, absolutely no repercussions for it. So we clearly need to address the problem. My position is to abolish the police. We need to radically transform public safety into more of a community-based thing that handles a specific narrow set of public safety issues. And they have very radically different training and protocols to how they respond to the public. That's what I view. But that's the way I think we should just completely reshape public safety in this country. But there needs to be radical change to the system, because this is ridiculous and this is untenable. Because that was a person. That was somebody 20 years old, had their whole life ahead of them, had a child, had family, had friends. And now that person doesn't exist anymore on this planet. And that was completely avoidable. And somebody is responsible for his death. And we need to make sure that situations like this cannot happen anymore. And other reforms to the in my ideal version of public safety, police should not just be walking around with guns. Because anytime clearly this is an issue where that is the first, second, and third resort anytime they come into some type of issue when they're interacting with the public. So, and this isn't like some radical idea. In most countries, the police don't walk around with guns. If they have a gun, it's like in the trunk for an emergency. And it's not like something that you just walk around with ready to use at all times. So there are many different ways to change the way that public safety in this country to prevent situations like this from happening. But Joe Biden was asked about this in the Oval Office today. And his answer was, it was just a typical response that you hear from presidents after an unarmed black person gets killed by the police. And so I'll show the clip. It's about a minute long, and then come back and break it down.
Call Daunte Wright's family, but our prayers with their family. It's really a tragic thing that happened. But I think we got to wait and see what the investigation shows. And the entire investigation. You all watched, I assume as I did, the film, which is the body cam, which is fairly graphic. The question is, was it an accident? Was it intentional? That remains to be determined by a full-blown investigation. But in the meantime, I want to make it clear again, there is absolutely no justification, none, for looting, no justification for violence. Peaceful protest, understandable.
So you see when he's asked, he says, "Hey man, not going to comment on the investigation, and we're going to let that play out or whatever." But the protesters, people in the street, "Oh, you guys, there's no excuse for the violence. You guys, and basically trying to browbeat and condemn the people in the street." And say what you will about people looting, say what you will about people rioting. The ideal way that the government should deal with people in the streets protesting or rioting is to address the reason why people are even in the streets in the first place. And I'll get into that later. But just the framing there is really important, because anytime you have a situation like this, you would never hear Joe Biden, Trump, Obama, none of the presidents, none of these politicians will ever come out and say, no matter how clear-cut it is. And in this case, like I said, you can't come 100% say she intended to kill him, but she is wrong and she is responsible, because to make a mistake like, "Oh, I meant to grab my taser, but I grabbed my gun," that's no excuse. And even if she was 100% honest with that, you're still responsible for killing a human being. So, but in other cases, with like George Floyd or with Tamir Rice or Breonna Taylor, those were clear-cut instances of police misconduct and the police killing unarmed people and using excessive force. And they were 100% in the wrong. But in every single instance of the police killing an unarmed person in this country, the response from politicians is always, let's just let the investigation play out, and we can't comment on that. But what we will comment on are the riffraff in the streets causing mayhem and stuff like that. There's no excuse for that. So it's always, let's let their investigation play out. But the people in the streets, we already know what the issue is. We already know it's looting. I don't need it. Looting's a crime too, just like murder's a crime. So if you want to take this principled stance of, I'm not commenting on police investigations, ongoing police investigations, then don't say anything about the riots either. But they have no problem speaking up about the riots, because that's what they're more animated by that than the police killing unarmed people. Because in their mind, in Joe Biden's mind, oh man, the police, they always mean well. You can't really blame them for it. But those other, so they hide behind the patina of, oh, we're gonna pretend to be all official, and oh, we're not gonna comment on investigations, and that is their go-to when they don't want to actually address the merits of the situation, even if it's clear cut and 100%, it's not up for debate. They still won't say anything about it, and they hide behind the investigations. But let them see some videos of somebody looting a CVS or somebody looting a Walmart or something like that. Their mind's already made up. It's funny how that works. And they're always giving the benefit of the doubt to the police officers and anybody else. Oh, you're just criminals, you're thugs, and this and that. People like to talk about the unarmed killings and the endless examples of the police using excessive force, and they talk about it's not bad apples, it's not an isolated incident, it's a systemic problem. And that is true, it is a systemic problem. So who's in charge of overseeing the system of policing in this country? That's the president. So, and you guys know me, I'm way more of I want to see action, I want to see policy, and I want to see results. That's the most important thing when it comes to politics. But even just the rhetoric, the president's rhetoric on this issue can have an impact. Because if you, instead of framing it like, oh, we have to let these investigations play out and I can't say anything about them, because this is what happens when they take that position. They let the investigation play out, and almost always there is a cover-up by the local police and the local district attorney's office. And they let the investigation play out. You'll have a case like Breonna Taylor's, where it was 100% the police officers were in the wrong. They were serving a no-knock warrant on somebody who had already been arrested. And when they showed up, they didn't announce themselves. They just started shooting through the door and they shot somebody. So if you present that evidence to a grand jury, they're going to indict that police officer. They're going to indict anybody involved in that because they were clearly responsible. But what they did to cover it up was the attorney general, they presented this shitty case to the grand jury on purpose because they weren't trying to get an indictment. So they left out a bunch of key evidence and they did a shitty job of presenting the facts. So the grand jury has no choice but to decline the indictment. So you have these situations like that playing out time and time again in city across the country, city, and state to state across the country, where they would either bury evidence, suppress evidence, or decline to prosecute, or they'll do some bullshit, present some bullshit case to the grand jury, and oh, would you look at that? They decline the indictment. So when these politicians like to say, oh, defer to the investigation, and they won't comment on the specific of the details of what we know, what the public can already see, then it's just sweeping it all under the rug, because then at no point are they ever going to say anything about it, no matter how clear cut it is. Like with George Floyd, that was murder. But they say, oh, we're not going to say anything about it, we'll let the investigation play out. Then they do that. They have the in this case, it was one of the rare occasions in George Floyd murder where they brought it to trial. And if for whatever reasons they declined to prosecute, they declined to find him guilty, the jury in the case, then all the politicians will come out and say, hey, it went through the process, the jury said no, and even though we all saw the man get murdered in broad daylight for 8 minutes, it's the police, apparently they didn't do anything wrong. So at the way that this is a long-winded way of saying that when you go through the process, at some point, the police officers will always be vindicated. And they will always come out looking like they did nothing wrong. And when the president doesn't interject and say, this was just wrong, and not even speaking about the specific case, the idea that a police officer can grab a gun instead of a taser and make that mistake, to have them even anywhere remotely near each other, that shouldn't be allowed. And you can say that is inexcusable. You can say that is indefensible without like unduly influencing the case. So there is this the way that it's talked about in public. Like I said, it's always give the police officers the benefit of the doubt, and everybody else, they're just the criminals, they're the thugs. And Joe Biden is clearly perpetuating that mindset here. And you have to at the same time acknowledge that this is Joe Biden. Again, we talk about the systemic problem of this, like the systemic nature of the problem. How we talked about who's in charge of the police departments across the country, who oversees the police departments in the country. But how else does the systemic problem, how does it start? It starts with policy and laws. So over the last 40 years, who has helped militarize the police? Joe Biden. Over the last 40 years, who has helped, basically framed the dynamics between the police and the public as if we're the enemy and they're like some occupying force meant to crack down on us? That was Joe Biden and his crime bills and his drug war. And like he said when he was passing the crime bill in '94, he was inflicting harsh penalties, gratuitously harsh penalties, and he was joking about it. He said in this bill, there's a death penalty for everything except for jaywalking. So who's responsible for crafting the system that makes the police an occupying force in these cities across the country? Joe Biden. So it was weird to me how during the campaign, people were trying to rebrand Joe Biden as this social justice warrior who's down for the cause. And he cares about the Black Lives Matter. He cares about the issue of police brutality, when that is completely contradictory of his record and even his current policy positions. During the campaign, he was going around talking about how he would give more money to the police than Donald Trump. So when people were talking about defund the police, take money from the police and put it towards social programs so that they aren't terrorizing communities and they aren't just have these bloated budgets to just like I said, just terrorize communities. Instead, just use the money for social programs to fix the root problems in the communities. When people were saying that after a whole record-breaking summer of protests, Joe Biden, his allegiance to the police was saying, fuck that, I want to give them more money. So Joe Biden has been in favor of this police state the entire way. And now he's president. And these situations happen. And all he has to say is, oh, shucks, we should let the investigation happen. And I'm not really going to do anything to fix to make sure that this never happens again. But what I will do is condemn the people in the streets and tell everybody that they're the criminals and they're the thugs. But as far as the police killing people on camera again, hey man, we just have to see and let it play out.